Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. In this tournament meta video, I'm going to take a look at the recently completed Hearthstone Championship Tour HCT Taipei Tour Stop and the best decks and the best lineups from that event. HCT Taipei was an online to offline tour stop, so first there were online qualifiers for around 2,000 people and finally 15 people made it to the Lan Finals. So that's quite an elite group, and here's what kind of decks those 15 people chose to bring to this tournament. The most popular deck was, unsurprisingly enough, Cubelock, with 8 players bringing that one. Another popular choice was Spiteful Druid, then there was a bunch of Murloc Paladins. Plan was divided between Murloc and Even Paladin. 5 Murloc Paladins, 3 Even Paladins. Warlock was divided between Cubelock and Control Warlock with 8 Cubelocks and 5 Control Warlocks, but Cubelock was the one that made it the furthest in the tournament. Actually every player in the top 4 brought Cubelock. Other popular choices included decks like Quest Rogue, Tempo Mage, Baku Face Hunter. There were actually 2 Baku Face Hunters in the finals. Early meta, aggro is good. There were some odd rogues, big spell mages, Mind Blast priests, and even a few warriors, either Baku controls, taunts, or maybe Baku taunt warriors. Overall, 15 players brought 17 different archetypes to the tournament, so it's still early and the meta is still quite diverse. With all of this stuff brought, what was the winning line? This time the winning line was aggro. Switch took home the grand prize, and this is his lineup. He brought Cubelock, he brought Baku Face Hunter, he brought Tempo Mage, and he brought Murloc Paladin. Very aggressive lineup. Soft targeting Warlock, soft targeting Quest Rogue. He banned away other Paladins, he banned away Tempo Mages, these other aggressive decks that are also good against other aggressive decks, and proceeded to take the tournament with this lineup. The second player in the finals, Stas, had almost similar lineup. He too had Cubelock, he too had Face Hunter, he too had Tempo Mage. The only difference was that he had a Quest Rogue instead of Murloc Paladin as the 4th deck. And when facing a lineup that's otherwise very aggressive, having that Quest Rogue in your lineup doesn't feel too good. So at least this early in the Witchwood metagame, it seems that aggro lineups are eventually able to overcome control. Taking a bit deeper look at Switch's decks. First he had a Cubelock deck. Well, Cubelock is Cubelock. The deck was highly refined during Kobolds and Catacombs already, and it hasn't underwent that many changes. There's cubes, there's Doom cards, there's Umbra. This particular deck had a couple of interesting card choices, one of which is the inclusion of 1 copy of Dark Possession. 1 mana deal 2 damage to a friendly character and discover a demon. So this gives you a bit more demons to summon from the Skull of the Manari, and it is also a convenient way to kill off a possessed lackey. Other tech choices for this deck included Acidic Swampu, so he brought some weapon removal of his own, and 1 copy of Voodoo Doll for some hard removal. Switch's next deck was his Face Hunter deck, of course featuring Baku the Moon Eater. Always with Baku, that 3 damage hero power ballista shot, that's really powerful stuff. Really puts control decks on a very tight clock. Switch's build is quite usual, early game going for the board and then gradually moving away from the board and doing direct damage. So you start with Dermals and Fireflies, Glacial Shard can give you some control, Acros Veteran can buff them up a little bit, this sort of early game board control. But then it moves on to just dealing damage, and he had a couple of cards that are not seen in all the decks that make it more likely that he's able to find those final points of damage. One of those cards is Lepanome. I really enjoy Lepanome, it's a great card. Death Rattle deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So when you're at the point that the enemy is starting to get those taunts down, you're starting to have a problem getting through. Lepanome, unless they can silence it, that 2 damage is going to come inevitably. Also 1 copy of Tracking, looking for those kill commands, looking for the lethal damage. Very good card for that. And he also had 1 copy of Blackwood Pixie. 3 mana 3/4 the battle card to refresh your hero power. So for 7 mana you can hero power the face for 3, you can play the Pixie, and you can hero power face for 3 again. Alternatively, Blackwood Pixie can serve as a regular 3-drop if it looks like you have a board control and you can keep pushing face. Its alternative, the Clockwork Automaton, which is a 5 mana card that doubles your hero power, and doesn't do it as a battle cry but as a continuous effect. So Clockwork Automaton is better when you play it on turn 7, because you get to keep the minion and the opponent will have to remove it, or the hero power will deal 6 again next turn. But it cannot be played as early because it costs 5 mana, so he had opted to go for the Blackwood Pixie instead. And the aggressive lineup, it just continues, which is Tempo Mage. Tempo Mage has risen quite suddenly in ladder right now, and the players who brought it to HCT Taipei were highly rewarded. It was very fresh when the decklist was submitted for this. And Switch's take is quite modern. It includes Cinderstorm, excellent card against Paladin for example, and for just pushing some damage. It also has a bit more rare of choice in Wexcrow, so it runs 1 copy of Life Drinker, which is quite common. Deal damage, heal yourself, excellent in aggro mirrors too, because you deal damage to the opponent and you get some heal, so your own clock is not that fast anymore after playing that. But he opted to go for Wexcrow in other slot whenever you cast a spell, summon a random 2-cost minion, so a bit of a board control approach as well. Perhaps a little bit indecisive because 1 copy of each, but it worked out for him. And the final deck in this aggro matchup is good old Murloc Paladin. After seeing all sorts of odd Paladins and whatnot, the real competition with Paladin decks has lately been, is it Murloc or is it even? And that was reflected in the tournament as well. All the Paladin players brought one or the other. It's either Murloc Paladin or it's even a Paladin. And even though Murloc Paladin seemed to lose so much, it lost the Vilefin Inquisitor, it lost the Grimscale Chum, but it did gain Nightmare Amalgam, which is quite a big Murloc. You don't see Murlocs this big usually. And of course, it still has Call to Arms, it still has Sunkeeper Tarim, and because Call to Arms pulls a bunch of Murlocs, and you have many ways to buff and interact with those Murlocs, it's still a very powerful archetype. And it really contests the title of the best Paladin deck in the game right now. And coming fresh off of a tournament win, you can't really contest that. However, while aggro decks had the edge in this tournament, the finalists were both playing aggro. There were lots of aggro decks in the top 4, but there were still some control lineups up to top 8 as well. So control was good enough to get out of the groups, but sufficiently many iterations of aggro opponents and eventually control decks fell. But let's take a look at the alternative. Can control lineup be good enough to beat this? The closest one is Mcweifu's. Mcweifu came with a completely different approach. He bans Quest Rogue. He plays Control Warlock, not Cubelock. He plays Big Spell Mage, not Tempo Mage. He plays Mind Blast Priest, and he plays a Baku Control Warrior. And this was the top 8 lineup, so it still wasn't bad. So let's take a bit of a look at what these decks were all about. First, Mcweifu's Control Warlock. So Control Warlock wins with Rin, or it wins by removing all the opponent's threats. It doesn't really have that many threats of its own. And Mcweifu's take on this build saw Despicable Dreadlords in it. Despicable Dreadlord is a card that has seen some rise in use in Control Warlock lately, because it's very good against token boards. And this deck also has the Skull of the Manari. So there's some complications playing Skull of the Manari in Control Warlock now that Medivh the Guardian is no longer available. So once you equip the Skull, unless your opponent removes it for you, you're stuck with the Skull. So you can't really play Skull in those matchups that you plan to win with Rin. But you can play it in other matchups and gain a lot of tempo. You can get those Void Lords out of your hand if you have already drawn them and can't get them from lackeys. You can get some Despicable Dreadlords on the board. Some really nice things can be done with the Skull, even in Control Warlock. So a heavy removal, grind out your threats type of deck. And that was really fitting with the rest of Mcweifu's lineup, because the next deck he has was Big Spell Mage. And this is not the most typical build of Big Spell Mage. It has all the essentials, of course. There's lots of AoE, there's Jaina, but it's also characterized by one card that is missing, and that card is Alexstrasza. There's no Alexstrasza in this build. Instead, there is the Lich King. There is also a lot of focus on early survival, with Stonehill Defenders, with Saronite Chain Gangs, with double weapon removal, both Gluttonous Zeus and Harrison Jones. It's another build that's really meant to grind the opponent out. And as you can probably guess at this point, that Quest Rogue ban is essential for this lineup. Quest Rogue would have such a great day against these decks. But other than that, control is not quite dead. There's still some powerful ways to try to grind out your opponent. Mcweifu's lineup did include one deck that actually has an active win condition, and that deck is the Mind Blast Priest. Even his Mind Blast Priest really hates weapons. Gluttonous, Harrison Jones, both are here once again. Other than that, it's the usual Mind Blast Priest setup. Once you are Shadow Reaper Anduin, then if you have 2 Mind Blasts in hand, you have 16 burst in one turn. So if you play Alexstrasza on your opponent, put them down to 15, if they don't heal up, you kill them next turn. Shadow Visions can give you even more Mind Blasts, so with 3 Mind Blasts you can have 19 burst, and so on. And should the opponent be a very aggressive deck, you don't always have to go for that kind of combo plays. You can just grind them out by removing everything they play, keep healing up, and throw Mind Blast here and there to finish them off if they don't concede. It is still a control deck, it's definitely a control deck, but it comes with an actual win condition other than just making your opponent quit. Finally, Mcweifu also brought Warrior in a tournament, 2018, that's sweet to see. And his Warrior deck of choice is Baku Control Warrior, not Baku Quest Warrior. There's no quest here, this is not a taunt-centric build, he does not want to get that Ragnar's hero power, but he does want to use Baku to just keep tanking up. And that ability to keep tanking up really makes it possible to use Reckless Flurry, because previously Warrior decks used to have these very high bursts of armor from something like Drywisker armor, and if you get a high burst of armor but that's not repeatable and you use your Reckless Flurry, then well, you're all out of armor. But if you have this steady gain, 4 armor per turn, 4 armor per turn, using Reckless Flurry is suddenly much easier. You get it off very easily, because you don't have to play that burst armor card first, and you can also replenish your armor again after playing that, giving Warrior access to a viable board clear. This particular build is heavily anti-aggro, heavily removal. Gluttonous Harrison Jones once again. It doesn't run any big win conditions. Like many of these decks run something like Elise the Trailblazer, you get that Ungoro pack, you might get some more win conditions from there, so you actually can have some active things to do. But this deck, not so much. Well, I guess Baron kind of is a big minion. King Mosh removes the opponent's board and it is a big minion, but for the most part, this deck is all about just removing everything from your opponent. Mcweifu actually, compared to other decks of this archetype, had replaced a couple of big endgame value cards that are usually in the decks with 2 copies of Fiery War Axe. So he really wants to have that early game presence. In addition to these 2 complete lineups, let's take a look at one more deck. That was an archetype that was quite influential in the tournament, even though it didn't appear in the finals. It's Odd Rogue. 5 players brought Quest Rogue, 4 players brought Odd Rogue. Which one is better? Quest Rogue is obviously a real control killer, but Quest Rogue has some weaknesses too. If you face very aggressive decks, your Quest Rogue might be in trouble, whereas Odd Rogue is also pretty good against many of the control decks, not quite as good as Quest Rogue, and it can also contest many of the more aggressive decks. Odd Rogue, for example, is favored against Face Hunter, and it is a very explosive deck indeed. With that 2-mana hero power you get to deal 4 damage over 2 turns. And there are some really nice cards that synergize with the ability to have that powerful damage or removal from your hero power. Pinch Clan Tug, you slam that down on 3, you keep hitting perhaps minions even with your hero power, and the tug keeps growing and hitting the opponent in the face. Same goes with Vicious Fledgling. It doesn't grow when you attack, but oh boy, when it gets to attack phase, then it really starts growing. Or alternatively, you can use Cold Blood on something like an Argent Squire, for example. You drop the Argent Squire, you protect it, you slam Cold Blood on it, it deals a lot of face damage. Or you can simply raise, you have Leroy and Cold Bloods in the deck after all. A very strong, very aggressive archetype. So that's what the Hearthstone tournament meta at the very top looks like now. In 1 week there will be the HCT playoffs for Europe. Then we get a bit of a wider glimpse of the meta, also a bit of more developed glimpse, because this was still very early in the Witchwood. But this might give you some ideas on what kind of decks and lineups people are bringing to tournaments. And many of these decks also work on ladder. For example, this Odd Rogue is a very good, well-tested ladder deck. And the same applies to Switch's Murloc Paladin. This is actually not even Switch's deck, because this is literally the most common Murloc Paladin build right now on ladder. For all your ladder needs, remember to also check out all of my deck guides on this YouTube channel, and I will be back with more tournament meta videos as more high-level tournaments are being played. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more.